Time now for the Sunday Talk. Tonight, the politics of privacy and a growing battle between the world's biggest tech company and arguably the world's most powerful law enforcement agency. The FBI wants Apple to unlock an iPhone belonging to a terrorist, but Apple is refusing. And this week, pro-Apple protests are planned for 30 international cities, reinvigorating an old debate, privacy versus security.
In order to protect America, the United States Senate must reauthorize the Patriot Act.
After September 11th, the American government suddenly had a much freer rein for fighting terrorism.
I'm okay with that. Security's number one.
But attitudes changed.
The public needs to decide whether these programs and policies are right or wrong.
In 2013, Edward Snowden revealed a massive domestic spying program run by the National Security Agency.
Do you trust a government to be able to have free reign over people's communications without any limitations on what they can do simply because they utter the word terrorism enough times?
Tech giants Apple, Google, and Microsoft were outed for supplying the U.S. government with users' information. Some moved to make their products more secure. Then, in December,
for multiple gunshot victims.
So this was an act of terrorism designed to kill innocent people.
An ISIS-inspired shooting in San Bernardino, the worst terrorist attack on American soil since 9/11. The FBI wants access to one of the killer's iPhones, but Apple's new encryption measures make it impossible. The FBI is now demanding Apple design new software to bypass the phone's passcode. Apple is refusing on moral grounds.
Once you have a backdoor key, it doesn't know whether the person using it is a good guy or a bad guy or not. So you end up undermining the security of all of the rest of us.
And while tech giants jump to Apple's defense, would-be presidential candidates are scoring points backing the FBI.
Boycott Apple until such time as they give that security number.
I'm joined by our panelists. Stephen Marsh is a culture writer with Esquire magazine. Tasha Carradine is a columnist with the National Post and iPolitics. And Ramona Pringle is a tech columnist with CBC and a professor at Ryerson University. So, Ramona, you're probably the techiest at the table tonight. Where are you? Are you team Apple or team FBI?
You know, I would say, like everything in this digital world, it is complicated. I would say that I'm on team the people. I think that the FBI, it makes sense that they want this information. But I also think that it's very much a precedent-setting case, and I understand where Apple is coming and speaking up for finally, if maybe it's at long last, the people, and saying, there are certain limitations in terms of privacy that we need to uphold.
We'll get your opinions in just a sec, but I found it really interesting. Like, Apple gave access to everything that was on the cloud on his phone up to about a month ago anyway, right? It's not like...
That's right. So the FBI has a fair bit of information already, and Apple has been playing along. So everything that was on Apple's servers, everything that was in the iCloud, Apple has worked with the FBI to give them that information. And in a sense, if you think of it as not just bits and data in the cloud, but actually property, if that was in their servers, which if our information is in the cloud, it's sitting on a server somewhere, then if the FBI came to them with a warrant and said, let us access your servers, it makes sense that Apple's going to play along. The thing with an iPhone that's different is that they've sold that iPhone to someone else. It may be an Apple phone, but it's no longer their property. It is the property of whoever owned it. So for them to come in and develop new software is all of a sudden very, very different than just saying, yes, come into our facilities, our premises.
What do you think, Tasha?
I'm on Team FBI, more or less. I see the other side, which puts me on Team Trump, which is disturbing. But that's a whole other conversation. Actually, to take that analogy, I do agree with you. There's an issue that it might belong to someone else. But you could say in the same way, if the FBI had a warrant to go into your house, and in the house there was a safe that had been manufactured by X company, and it was very, very secure, and the only way you could get into that safe to get the information in there was to design a special key, I don't think we'd be having this conversation. I think the reason people are so upset is because of the technology is the key here. And so many people have that technology. But I still think that in the interest of security, someone could potentially be killed based on the fact the FBI doesn't have information on other terrorists that might be in that phone. And to me, that trumps no pun intended, privacy.
Team Trump, Stephen?
Well, no, I'm very much Team Apple. I mean, very rarely do I find myself on the side of a megalith technology corporation. But, I mean, to me, to take this analogy further, like, essentially the FBI is asking them to design a key that can open anybody's safe under any conditions, and also, which we are absolutely, there is no guarantee will belong strictly to the FBI. Apple will produce it. And I think, the real question here is the precedent. What you have is the FBI asking a huge technology company to design software in order to aid them in the investigation of crime. That, to me, is just incredibly dangerous. I think this is one of those situations where genuinely the precedent will shape the future of how we relate to technology for the conceivable future.
I may have been watching too much TV lately, but I've sort of wondered, and I'm hardly a tech wizard, aren't there genius hackers who would figure out how to get that information off those phones?
So that's just it. I mean, I think at this stage, if the U.S. doesn't have someone working for them already, then the U.S. is probably in trouble because the Chinese government most likely does. These terrorist organizations most likely do. There are hackers within the U.S. who most likely do. It's why we see, it's why we have conversations about Anonymous going after ISIS, because there are other forces that are part of the political spectrum now.
McAfee, of McAfee Security, has said, give me 3 weeks. I will unlock this phone. He's offering to do it for free. So to say that this technology doesn't exist, I think, is not really part of the argument.
So then what's really happening then?
But that's it, because it's the precedent. I mean, what it is the FBI knowing that because it's terrorism, because it's these evil people, that they can use this to justify skirting a law or creating a precedent whereby they will be able to ask any, really any technology company to help them in the investigation of crime. And I mean, just think about what the potential of that for Google is, for any kind of information that we use in our daily lives. I mean, it's really terrifying.
There is actually, in New York City, the Attorney General of New York said, we have about 100 phones in our possession that relate to all sorts of crimes, including murder, where we can't get the data. And it would be similarly able, they would be able to access it if they did have a key like this. So while you might say, yes, it could open a lot of doors, some of those doors could be open for value.
So now we're going to give it to the New York Attorney General? I mean, how long is it going to be before I can download it on my phone myself?
Well,
I mean, it's just, like, this is just too dangerous. It's like Tim Cook said, like, some weapons should not be invented. And this is one of those weapons that should not be invented.
When we look at things like this is that, it's easy to look at, this is one scenario and it's one phone. And I think that's where there's a lot of misconception in this story is we keep on talking about it as if it is one phone, when the fact is, once a key like this is created, this back door that we keep hearing people talk about, it's, you can't have security for some and not for others. You can't have access for some and not for others. Once you create this, it's something that is available not just to the good guys, not just to the U.S. government or the Canadian government if they, become friends and get access to it, but to terrorist organizations, but to hackers
but
eventually.
You were saying exactly that these people probably already have it, and it's a question of the white hat guys not having it. And I think that the good that could come of it, I agree, there are always dangers to these things, but I think that it would outweigh the negative impacts. And people, another thing, people have really, I think, abandoned a lot of their privacy themselves. We always talk like we have a right to privacy. We put ourselves out there.
That's the other interesting part of this debate, I find, is that here we have these heroes of the people, Microsoft and Google and Apple.
Your friends.
Yeah, my buddies.
Yeah,
me and Tim, we're just hanging out.
Meanwhile, they're collecting, they're marketing on people's personal data. Isn't that a bit rich?
I mean, to me, the difference between a decision that you make with the government, or even, no one can debate that the FBI shouldn't have access to things on the cloud. I mean, if you save something on your iPhone to the cloud, that is no longer private information.
Well, people might think that it is, though.
Well, it's not. It's private information but the government has access to all that sort of thing. The question is really, when do we, what are the limits that we allow on government surveillance and technology? I mean, if there is no limit, then I think we're living in a very dark world.
But this limit was created by Apple, too. This technology didn't exist. They created this to make their phones more secure. And so it's not as if this just was always existing. I think it's a limit. Limits evolve, and I think that's why this case is an important test case.
I think that when we do talk about privacy and we do talk about the limits that we see, I mean, the one place where I have a little bit of criticism for Apple or all of these other tech companies that are now coming to Apple's defense is where this might be opportunistic of the FBI to all of a sudden push for the backdoor that they've been seeking for the past couple of years, it's also an opportunity for Apple to take control of the narrative and say, we're the good guys, we are on the side of the people.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden Google and Facebook and Twitter have all over the weekend jumped to the defense of Apple and said, we are pro-privacy, when they've made their billions off of everyone's personal information.
And I think Apple, I can completely understand Apple's position. They don't want to be known as the company that unlocked the phone. They want to maintain for their customers this to vent. So I think they're going to push this to the limit, no matter what courts say, until they are literally forced to either go there with a technologist. Exactly, we tried.
But I also think that the piece of this to say that people are sharing all of their information anyway is one of the biggest myths that we are facing right now when it comes to our relationships with technology and when it comes to our relationship with privacy, in that, yes, we may post a huge amount of information to Facebook, but when it's really dangerous, I mean, privacy is about dignity, and privacy is about choice, and privacy is about freedom. And you may not, the things that you don't post, you may post everything under the sun, except for maybe personal information that's medical, that is your bank account information, that may impact, you know, here in Canada, we're very lucky that we can be free in terms of our, you know, sexual orientation or in terms of our religion. But that's, you know, these are technologies that work the world over, that different communities are different. And I think having the ability to choose what you share with your employer and your government is a huge factor.
That after 9/11, and maybe you think that things have changed a lot since then, and they certainly have in some ways, but that people, many Americans were okay with the Patriot Act, but they're not okay when it's the stuff on their phone.
Well, I think we've learned, right? I mean, the thing that terrorism does is it makes democratic societies act stupidly. And that's why terrorists do it. I mean, because our response to these things is so idiotic and so self-defeating that it always hurts us.
I don't think it's idiotic. How can you say it's idiotic? People were killed here in the United States by a terrorist act. I don't think it's idiotic for the FBI to want that information, know if there were future attacks.
To destroy the capacity for people to have private communications because of San Bernardino is insane.
But that is an assumption. That's exactly the assumption that Apple wants people to think that this technology will be then used. I mean, to go to your point about medical technology, you know, courts today use DNA, the most private information you can ever have, in court cases all the time. They have access to the DNA of the accused. That, to me, is a greater violation of privacy.
Got to wrap in just a moment, but last quick point to you, Ramon.
I think people will always react based on, you know, the people that they care about in their own best interest. And so when it comes to issues of national security, the reasons that we respond so viscerally is because we can see the people around us being hurt by things. And I think the difference between now and 9/11 is that for the past 10 years, we have these devices. And for the past 10 years, we've been living networked lives where we have devices that track where we are and who we speak to and what our records are and what our bank account information is. And so all of a sudden, just like national security hits us on that very visceral, emotional way about us and the people we love, so privacy is starting to become an issue that way as well. And I think that that's where you see this being such a complicated issue.
Yeah, well, I've learned a lot. Thank you very much. And there's more to come this week as the protests are building. This debate's not going anywhere.